Good afternoon and welcome. We're missing sunshine outside today, but there is sunshine in the room. I'm inspired and I have learned a lot so far from the last sessions. What about you?
Yes.
Good. We're going to continue the conversation. My name is Maranke Ocean Martin. This session 3, is Leadership Forum, Urgent Need for Collaboration to Strengthen the Golden Triangle, Communities and Countries of Color. So what we're discussing here, as we've been doing all morning, is how we can collaborate and cooperate as Africans, Caribbeans, and Americans to leverage our knowledge, our skills, and our expertise to foster investment and economic development, all of which is needed to lift up communities of color in that, and I'm going to keep using that word, the Golden Triangle. Again, the Caribbean, Africa, and the United States. This topic is not new. We've been talking about this for years, even decades. But things are changing. Recently, business and political leaders from Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States have been meeting at various diasporic business conferences, including AfriXM conferences in Barbados and Guyana, very, very recently. We're continuing the conversation here in Jamaica, and as the Honorable P.J. Patterson said earlier, we must bring young people in the conversation. Got to bring them into the conversation. They have ideas. They're engaged in so many areas that some of us are not even in touch with. So let's begin by welcoming our panelists here. We have a few. Dr. Hazel Dukes is here. She is president of the NAACP New York. The Honorable Carl Heastie, Speaker of New York Assembly. You heard from him earlier. Honorable Diane Abbott, and she is a member of Parliament in the UK. We also have, you said LaToya Joyner isn't joining us, correct? Unfortunately not. And we have Honorable Kevin Parker, who is here, right here with us. All right, and that should constitute our panel. And so we're, as I said, we're running a little bit behind. So if you will indulge me, I thought each member would speak for 5 to 7 minutes. Is that fair enough, folks? Okay, 5 to 7 minutes. We'll then open up the floor to questions and comments so we can have a real conversation. We want to make this a conversation. This is an opportunity for the young people in the room to share their thoughts and contribute to the discussion. I know young folks have a lot to say. Take the chance today. Help shape this conversation. The panel will then have an opportunity after we have questions. They'll have an opportunity for a few closing remarks if they choose. And I'm hoping that the Honorable P.J. Patterson, Mr. Pert, and Ms. Lorna Green will also join us to kind of like round out this, this discussion. So without further ado, I know that the Honorable Carl Heastie wants to go first. Am I right?
That's okay. Well, thank you again and all for being here. And I think this is a very important subject. And as I said earlier in my comments, and if I'm repeating myself, it's because I think it's, you know, it's important. I'd say earlier this year, it became an idea amongst myself and some of my colleagues that we should really kind of start a tour of being reunited with the countries that that have our heritage. And that's why, like I said, I took a delegation of members to the Bahamas where, although Mr. Rodney mentioned I have a small part of the Caribbean side of me is from Jamaica, but most of it is from the Bahamas. And so I took a delegation of members there. Of course, we look forward to coming to the Carib News here in Jamaica. And as I said 2.5 weeks ago, I was in Guyana, which quite honestly, maybe if you have a little bit of money, that might be the place you want to invest in right now. It's the #1 place in the world where you want to invest because of the oil rights and the fact that Guyana will be able to, and I'm not going to steal too much of Kevin's thunder because he is the energy chair, but the way that they'll be able to do it is much more, I'd say, environmentally friendly and in a greener way than others. So Guyana is probably one of the hotter places to invest if you're looking to invest. But why also is that, important and meeting with the different business interests when we go to the different countries of our heritage as New Yorkers is because, one, New York has a lot of money and there's a lot of opportunities. When we met with the Deputy Prime Minister when we went to the Bahamas, for them, 70% of their tourism visitors come from the tri-state area, in New York. So keeping those relationships and that conversation going is important. And then for us as, people of color and black people, we keep having this discussion about generational wealth. Well, that's how you get generational wealth, when people have opportunities to invest in businesses, own businesses, be partners in businesses. We need to we should be beyond the discussion of a contract at this point. We have to start talking about ownership and partnership in regards to where we are. Because, years ago, it seemed like we were always arguing to just make sure that we got a contract as an NWBE, but I think we should be getting ownership now in things that are MWBE. And so, with those type of things in mind, that's how, we should continue to move as black people, as Caribbean people, and I'd say in forwarding those relationships with our countries of heritage, because they actually do look to the United States and they look to New York for leadership and guidance and also in partnership as well. And and also for New York, it's a rarity. We're probably, they used to call D.C. the chocolate city. New York might be the chocolate state right now. We have a black lieutenant governor, a black attorney general, a black, black mayors of 3 of the 5 major cities in New York State, a black speaker, a black majority leader, a black mayor, a black public advocate, a black city council speaker. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, while we have these positions, to make sure that we are trying to do all we can to make sure that opportunities for people of color in New York, and also I think, and also fostering and really pushing the relationships that those of us who are black legislators, whether we want to remember our heritage of the Caribbean islands or in Africa, because the boats all started from Africa, no matter where they dropped us, all along. And even finding, and you start to do history. My father, God rest his soul, sometimes he'd be watching these things and I'd be like, what is wrong with that man? But now 20-something years later, I'm doing the same things with him. I'll just see something and I'll just start to want to research and look it up. And, as you really start to study, the entire, I'd say the where all of the slaves were deposited or dropped off along from the journey of Africa, is really interesting to see. They kind of were all treated the same way in all of the countries. It's like the darker you were, the more troublesome, of a problem that you were. So I just think it's really incumbent upon all of us to keep that in mind. As I say that all of the ships started in Africa, no matter where they dropped you, whether it was in South America, Central America, the Caribbean, or in America. We all started from the same place, and in some shape or form, we're all brothers and sisters that started in the great land of Mother Africa.
Good morning. I did not give you greetings early, but I'm going to take 2 minutes to talk about this conference. For all the newcomers, this is my 28th year. Even with COVID, when we were virtual, I was there. Let me say, this conference is always exciting. And this morning, from the beginning to the Honorable Patterson, to Miss Green, is she still in the room? Miss Lorna Green, thank you. You are so on it. You are so on it. That's the topic of the day, really, that we should be in. Let me say about the collaboration. There's no one can network like the Rodneys in their quiet, dignified way. I have been with the Rodneys for over 30-some years. They have supported the NAACP to bring the communities together in Brooklyn, which is one of our hallmark of the Caribbean community. Many of our stalwart, Kevin, was deceased, the Tom Fortunes, the Lucille Rose, they all deceased, and so the NAACP was absolutely gone. Many of the judges there. Our speaker, by the way, Speaker Heastie, was raised in NAACP by a man named Al Tuitt, who's deceased now. Right. But we have, Shirley Fearon is still around. We have mentored, and I heard this young man talk about mentorship. You didn't get the answer that I would like for you to have. The mentorship that you see from our speaker, from our senator, is been that it's been the African American community in the diaspora reaching out, working with each other. So these two great men that we have here from New York today has been mentored not only by their own community, but by the reaching out of the African American community to know that we're all in the boat together. As the speaker said, if I go up, they go up. If I go down, they go down. So we are pulling and reaching each other up. And let me say to Ms. Green on the topic, on the what is the order of today right now for us that we're going to move forward, is this century, as Congressman Ambassador Young said, we got to be in this together. For our young people, Ms. Green talked about her daughter, her granddaughter, who's 11 years of age now, where it is. This speaker said that he would not want to be known as a speaker that put people in prison. He wanted their lives to be better. We today at this conference have heard of our history and where we've been and where we have to go now. And if you didn't pay attention to what Ms. Green said, everyone was great. The investor, the young man who is investing in Ghana and that, but you can't invest if you're not in the tune of digital divide. And I want to also say to you for the first comment that our speaker, along with our majority leader, put together, we are talking about reparation all over the world. They put together a committee that is working with communities, having hearings all over. But Ms. Green named things that we ought to be about. I'm all for giving those who paved the way for me to be here. But looking at the future, you must look at health, the disparities in health. You must look at education, where our children are now. You must look at the criminal justice system. You must look at economic development. And we are so far behind. We are so far behind as a people, black folks, as the Honorable Patterson said. I don't care what island you're from, what nationality you want to be in. You know, some people say to me, I got some Cherokee blood in me. No, I'm just black. The speaker had a man in his assembly used to just stand up and say, all I want to talk about is black, 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 Charles Barrett. Well, I'm not that far gone, but I do say, don't get me divided. Don't divide me. Whether you are from Jamaica, whether you from Ghana, you black, you with me, and I'm with you. And what Ms. Green brought forth to us today is where we in our community must change our way of thinking, our culture, and our behavior towards each other. Did you hear that? Our behavior towards each other. We can't be black when we want something. We have to be black all the time. Day in and day out. People come to me and they say, well, what is the NAACP going to do about it? Well, if you were part, we could do more about it than we're doing. But when you stay outside and cast rocks and throw bricks into the glass house, you're tearing down the whole house, not just me, not just the NAACP, which, by the way, is celebrating its 115 years. Nobody goes in a courtroom, and we had it in our community. Why don't you change the name from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People? Well, we just heard we come in different colors. But when our lawyers go into a courtroom all over this nation, when they see those letters, they stand up and take another look. They don't see whether they come in for black folks. Because everything blacks have done in this country, we've lifted everybody up. The white women march wouldn't have been if they didn't take it from what we had marched on. George Floyd, people was locked up, so that's why some of them joined the march. They wasn't there all the time with us. They were locked up, and so when the TV said come, they went. But some of us been going before the TV told us to go. We went when Grandma couldn't even spell her name, but she knew about justice and how she was being treated, how she couldn't vote, how she had to tell how many bubbles was in the soap. So the collaboration is so important for us if we are going to move forward as a people, not dividing ourselves about who is where and where we come from. We all came from somewhere. As the speaker said, they dropped us off at many places. But we are all here now. And so what we got to do is pull our resources together. We have to mentor our young people. We have to take them where the opportunities are. I walk young people and parents into schools. Parents are afraid to go into schools. Our education institution is not friendly to those who are not wealthy. We are fighting in New York now for public education. We have a two-tier system. We have charter schools and we have public schools. The charter has gone and entered into public school space where some of our children don't have music, don't have art anymore. So the fight and the struggle continues. We don't tell parents where they send their children to school, but we do tell them that Johnny and Sue should have the best education it is in America. That's justice, that's freedom. And when we say that, it's not just for black children alone, it's for all children. It's for all children. And so I've been with this conference and will stay with it because the collaboration that we talk about here is so important. And the subject matters that we had here today, absolutely investment in Ghana. I've had the privilege to go to Ghana 3 times with the links. There's a great women organization that has been over Ghana, NAACP with the Du Bois house and kind of things that they hope to accomplish there. But when Ms. Green talked about where we are today, with respiration, with what we need to do, where we need to focus on, the disparity in health, we still die. We still die. Black women with breast cancer, it's still the highest. We gotta look at that. We gotta look at agriculture. We have to look at economic development and criminal justice. And so to the rottenness, thank you so much for continuing. Yes, we've had some down years. I remember when we had 20 members of Congress here. Time is changing, so maybe they can't come. They'll send a message to us. Yes, Hakeem name, Jeffrey's name was mentioned here this morning. Absolutely, he's doing a great job. Keep him in your prayers. Remember our speaker who's here. It's tough when you're in a body of many people with many different minds to get legislation passed. It's tough. These men, Kevin Parker with his chairship, these men and women that we have selected in New York State, they have it at their heart to see that we collaborate, not just in New York State, but worldwide. Because when we go up, you go up. When we go down, you go down. Thank you so much.
Honorable Diane Abbott, where are we on this issue? Where do we need to be?
I think that we're in a great place, but the potential is so much greater. The theme of this session is collaboration to strengthen the Golden Triangle. And I think there's a great deal of scope for collaboration. As I said earlier, we are a global people, and that puts us in a tremendous position to benefit and contribute to a world which is increasingly international and increasingly global. So how do we collaborate? And how do we strengthen ourselves? And how do we move forward? First of all, we have to relate directly to each other. That sounds obvious, but speaking as someone whose parents were born and brought up in a former British colony, I think one of the worst legacies of colonialism is we can doubt each other. We can doubt each other, and we can think that the colonizer is more important, is more preferable to relate to than people that look like you. I think it's very important to relate to each other, and if we try to relate to each other, we will understand the potential, for instance, of migrants of whatever colour in Britain. The most highly educated group of migrants are Nigerians. And we have to understand, we have to leave behind the legacy of colonialism and be prepared to reach out to each other, and then we will understand and see the potential. When you're talking about reaching out to other people of colour, I was actually married to a Ghanaian, so I think I can, speak up. Yeah, man. Shirley knows, right? So I think I can speak up for the importance of reaching out. And my son, who was obviously born in Britain and went to school in Britain, but in his teenage years, I sent him to school in Ghana. Now, I can't say he was thrilled at the very beginning, but I was very firm about it, because for me, if you're a person of color, you need to understand your African roots. You need to understand your African roots, because we live in a society, certainly in Britain and other former colonies, which is shaped by the colonizer, and you have to take very direct measures to shake off that colonial legacy. So it's important to engage directly with each other, and it's important not to doubt each other. It's also important, if we're talking about strengthening the Golden Triangle, to leverage our assets. Because sometimes, as people of color, we talk about the problems, we talk about the difficulties, but we need to leverage our assets. We have many assets as a people. If you look at sport, there is a lot of money to be made in sports. And obviously individual sports, men and women, make money. But are we really leveraging what people of color are contributing to the world of sport? I'm not sure that we are. I mean, I have a young man who worked for me years ago, and he's working around the issue of football, not American football, but football as we know it in Britain. And if you look at British football, particularly in recent years, some of the top players are people of color. Some of the top players. And there isn't a top team in what we call the Premier League, which doesn't have sportsmen, footballers who are people of color. But if you look at the people that manage those teams, if you look at the people that are invested in those teams, if you look at the people who are really making money, not just the individual footballers, but the people that are really making money out of sport as an institution, it's not people of color. And we need to move forward. We cannot allow people who are not people of color to be making the real money out of our sports skills. So that's one way that we collaborate. If we look at music, I think the young people actually are a bit more forward on this. But it's the same issue. It's our skills, it's our talent, it's our energy, which is moving a situation forward. When you look at the people who are in control, when you look at the people who are at the top, when you look at the people who are making the real money, it's not people of color. If you look at culture and theatre, it's the same thing. Without our talent, without our skill, without our potential, where would these sectors be? But who is in control? Who is at the top? Who is making the money? So, as I say, we need to relate to each other. We need to leverage our assets, the potential of our assets. And I would also say, my fellow panelist is no longer with us, we also have to look quite often, even when not in national politics. I'm a national British politician. Even when not in national politics, we're in local politics. And I would say, if we're strengthening the Golden Triangle, we need to look at our role in local politics, and we need to ask, who are we giving the contracts to? Who are we investing in? Who do we employ? We need to leverage our role in local politics to see what we can do to strengthen that collaboration and strengthen communities of color, not just in America, not just in Britain, but around the world. So I think those three things, we need to believe in each other, we need to relate to each other, we have to understand that at the current time, the people making the real money out of sport and music and culture are not people of color. And we want to leverage our role in local politics to see what we can do to strengthen business, black business and move it forward. So as I said at the beginning, in an increasingly global and international world, we as people of colour are really well placed to move forward. But I suppose what I would say is that for those of us whose origins are in former colonies, we need to shake off the legacies of colonialism. And I think the most pernicious legacy of colonialism is what it did to our minds. So we have to shake off the legacy of colonialism. And despite the great progress we've made, I think there's even greater progress ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Honorable Kevin Parker, how do we strengthen the Golden Triangle? Let's take this one. Is it working? No, take this one. Take this one.
No? Hello? Yeah, it is working. Okay. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn, which is Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Canarsie, Flatlands, Mill Basin, Marine Park, and Bergen Beach. I see I have some constituents out there, exactly. I'm the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, as well as the majority whip in the New York State Senate. And really want to begin by thanking the Rodneys for this convening. Please, let's give them a round of applause. And not just for this convening, but for their consistency in understanding how important this relationship is. And so we can't talk about a golden triangle without the people who mine the gold. And they have certainly have put us together in a way to make sure that we're productive. And I thank them for that. And it's made me a better legislator and somebody who's more responsive, representing the largest concentration of Caribbean immigrants outside the Caribbean in the world, right? And so when you go around places and you want to see the largest concentration of Jamaicans outside of Jamaica is Flatbush, the largest concentration of Bajans outside of Baja, right? Y'all missed that, right? Out of Barbados? Y'all wasn't paying attention. I'm trying to see if y'all paying attention. Y'all not. The largest concentration of Guyanese outside of Guyana, right? The largest number of Panamanians outside of Panama is in Flatbush, right? And so it's a community that really is the little Caribbean, and I've been proud to represent them for now going on 20 years, and that would not have happened if it wasn't for the Carib News and the Rodneys and their leadership. I also obviously want to, please, thank you, Annette Robinson, yes. And people like former Assembly member and former council member Annette Robinson, who's here, thank you. Yes, please. And Mama Dukes, I'm a Gold Life member of the NAACP. I actually worked with Mom Dukes on bringing back the Brooklyn NAACP when we waned for a little while, and we've had some great leadership now for over a decade. But I've had an opportunity to work with that organization, and it's been critical. And then certainly my longtime friend, Carl Heastie, the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, and even though we're in different bodies legislatively and have somewhat different responsibilities, we work very much collaboratively. But I tell people all the time, that's my speaker. That's my speaker. And Carl's a very humble man, and so he's not telling you that, like, in the context of him being the speaker of literally one of the most important states in the United States and one of the most important places literally in the world, he helps negotiate a $229 billion budget, right? Let's understand that. The state of New York has the 12th largest economy in the world. We have an economy larger than Spain, right? And he helps negotiate. And when we first came into politics, Carl, there were 3 men in the room, and there were 3 white guys in the room. Now, the 3 men in the room are 2 women and 2 African Americans, and that's amazing, right? And including, and so a lot of the work and a lot of what you see in New York, and he talked about it as being like kind of, like DC's called Chocolate City. I refer to us as being the real life Wakanda in New York State. And he didn't even talk about everybody. I mean, we have a black Chief Justice in the state of New York, which we just did, which again was not an easy thing. He didn't talk about the people on our regions. Right, and the fact that the chair of the Regents Board, who runs education in the state, is somebody who's African American. Right, we have 2 of the biggest counties in the state of New York have black district attorneys, right? All those things have made a significant difference in the way that we are able to move through the world in New York. And so when you talk about New York as a bastion of progressive thought and progressive legislation, and things like protecting a woman's right to choose, right? And things like a law that I was able to pass that declared racism a public health crisis, right? Like we get to do that because people like Carl Heastie is in place to move that legislation, and so we're able to work together to make sure that we're protecting our folks. We just did Clean Slate, and congratulations again to the speaker on us passing Clean Slate, which now for the first time, doesn't make a mistake that somebody made early in their life, follow them for the rest of their life, that they're able to seal records. And so I could go on and on about the work that we've been able to do in New York because we have the right people in place. And I think that jumping on what Honorable Abbott is saying in her remarks is that now when we look at this golden triangle in Africa, in the Caribbean, and in New York, we now have people in place that we can get things done. And so that potential, as she indicated, is amazing. And as the world now becomes global, we have to remember that we were always global, right? And so that if you go back and Carla would tell you to look at a book by Joseph Holloway called Africanisms in America. And Professor Holloway in that book actually talks about the specific places in which, and specific people groups that were brought here to the New World, into the Western Hemisphere, in that early triangle trade. I would tell you to look at Ivan Van Sertima and books he wrote like They Came Before Columbus, where he actually is talking about an early African presence in early America, where he's talking about like the Olmec heads and where they came from, and the fact that you have pyramids in South America, and that's just not a random thing. And they weren't built by aliens, despite what they wanted. They'd rather give it to anybody. They ain't making them aliens to give it to, rather than to attribute African people with the work that they've done in the global places that we come from. As I recognize somebody who's been a mentor to me, Annette Robinson, she comes and hails from a place called Bedford-Stuyvesant, which people don't realize was founded as a free black community. And so there are people who you meet in Bed-Stuy, you're like, yo, where you from? They're like, Bed-Stuy. They're like, no, where you from before? They're like, where your people from Bed-Stuy? Like, they ain't from no place else. They from Bed-Stuy. They've been living there for 300 contiguous years. And so if you're in Brooklyn, you do yourself a disservice by not visiting Weeksville and the Weeksville Center there that has preserved much of that history, and see how we have lived there for a long time. And so we are in these places. And so let me talk about the collaborations and how we strengthen this golden triangle. Teamwork makes the dream work. Right, and so I think a lot of it is about collaboration, and I think it's about understanding ourselves as a diasporic people and a global people. And at a time, and one of the things I wanted to thank the Rodneys for is in these spaces, I've been able to really meet people like P.J. Patterson, who I would have never had an opportunity to sit in close contact with and learn from and have a real conversation with. One of the people a number of years ago, before his passing, Ibaye, that I got to sit with a number of times was Rex Nettleford. And part of people who are Jamaican understand how much Rex Nettleford was important in terms of developing the Jamaican ethos. When you go any place, like early when I grew up in New York, everybody Caribbean was Jamaican. Everybody, especially like you come from a non-Caribbean household, everybody's Jamaican, right? And it's not just because there's so many of y'all, but like the pride that Jamaicans have, like nobody has the kind of pride that Jamaican people have. And I'm not just saying that because I want to make sure I leave this country at some point, but it's a real thing, y'all know, and so when I spoke to Rex Nettleford, we forget about how young these countries are. Right, about the Caribbean nations. Most of them are not older than me, and I'm young. Y'all supposed to laugh at that. Like this is a damn shame. Way young, but these countries less than 60 years old, right? They can't even get. Most of these countries can't even get Social Security, and so what it took to bind together groups of people, right? In these nations has absolutely been incredible. And so having the opportunity in this place, in this space to do that has been important. But we have to be able to hold on to that pride while simultaneously looking past our disagreements with our brothers and sisters in other places. And CARICOM is a step towards that, right? And CARICOM has been a big, important piece. We now need to make sure that we're doing that in all of the places, right, in Africa, in New York. And so let me just talk about 2 or 3 things that we could be doing substantively that I think will get us there. First of which is that, and I'm going to talk from my perspective as a state legislator. And so I try to kind of play in my own sandbox and think about where the aspects that I can be impactful on. The state of New York, again, which has the 12th largest economy in the world, has offices, economic development offices in 29 countries. People don't realize that, right? The Empire State Development Corporation is our flagship organization. We really need to have a Empire State Development Corporation office somewhere here in the Caribbean, right? And maybe it's Jamaica, maybe it's, Guyana, someplace to house it, right? But we need to have one so that people in New York State have a way to easily go to a one-stop shop where any place they want to do in the Caribbean, they have people there and who have the resources and the relationships in order to build that. We should also do that in West Africa somewhere as well. Maybe it's Lagos, maybe it's in Accra, but we should definitely do both West Africa and someplace in the Caribbean. We forget also that the Port Authority, any place that has a direct flight from New York State to that country, we have a Port Authority office in that place. Those are also places that we can use in order to do economic development work, and a lot of times we don't realize that. So any place there's a direct flight, that means there's a Port Authority office there, we can use them as well. A lot of times it's around logistics, but sometimes that's part of what you're doing, especially if you're doing trade and you're moving stuff around. The other thing is that we have a very capable brother, Dr. John King, who runs SUNY, the State University of New York. And a lot of people have heard of that, and like, what does that mean, have to do with economic development? First thing people should realize is that SUNY, the State University of New York, is the largest agency that's not a federal agency in the United States. The largest government entity that's not a federal agency in the United States, right? And so we have several campuses. Is run by a brother who's the chancellor, Dr. John King. We really need to do a better job at connecting our universities through the Caribbean with SUNY. And it's a fairly easy process. You get us the names of the organizations and the person who's the contact person. We call John King. We say, hey, we want to create a formal relationship, and they take care of it. And because me and Carl make sure that he gets appointed, he gonna listen to what mostly Carl, but I'm gonna try to add myself in there just because, I don't want to feel like, I don't want to feel like the Bronx doing better than Brooklyn, but I'm just saying. But it's a fairly easy process. And so before we leave here in the next couple of days, if there's not already a formal relationship between a university here in Jamaica, and I'm not limited to Jamaica, but I'm saying we have enough resources to have almost, in a significant number of relationships. And so, with Barbados, with Trinidad, with Dominica, like wherever, we should tell us who your institutions are and let's develop. And that's important to trade research, right? To do faculty exchanges, to do student exchanges, right? To do capacity building, right? And that's going to be, I think, a critical area for us to work on together. A second area that we really should be working on is agriculture. So everybody thinks of New York, and they think of New York City, and they understand that we're the financial capital of the world, which we are, and it's the largest thing that we get in terms of gross receipts. The second largest thing we get in gross receipts is agriculture. People don't think about New York as an agricultural state, but it really is. And so we are the third largest dairy producer in the entire United States. We're the first largest producer of yogurt, the second largest producer of apples, third largest producer of sweet corn and snap peas, fourth largest producer of onions and corn, right? Like we're the second largest Christmas tree producer, right? Outside of North Carolina. So there's a lot of agricultural work that needs to be done. And in the context of CARICOM, let me argue that even though the CARICOM nations are primarily politically independent, I would argue that they continue to be economic colonies And somebody alluded to that in the last conversation. And if anybody doesn't know what I mean by that, a colony from an economic perspective is defined by a place that eats what it doesn't produce and produces what it doesn't eat. Let me say that again. It eats what it doesn't produce and produces what it doesn't eat. And so it's similar, like I just saw something on like CNN a couple of weeks ago where they were showing cocoa, so like 60% of all the chocolate in the world comes from cocoa beans that come out of West Africa, mostly Ghana. They sat down with some cocoa farmers, and half of the cocoa farmers had never tasted chocolate. They had never had chocolate, and they've been farming this stuff their whole life and never had manufactured chocolate because they don't keep the manufacturing there because that's where the money is made. Right? And there's a whole like thing about like child labor and enslavement and all kinds of stuff that's behind chocolate too. That's a whole other stuff. I don't want to mess up nobody's holiday. Why they like they can't eat the chocolate cake. But it's a whole thing, right? And that's part of what we need to break, right? Like there really needs to be a real study within the context of CARICOM and West Africa and figure out what are the things that we could produce. Right, like I know from a nutrition perspective that there's only like 12, like to have a well-rounded diet, you really only need 12 different things in your diet, right? We could probably do better than that, right? I mean, I know in Jamaica, if you're eating a mango on the way to the store, you drop the seed on your way back, there's a tree. So like, I know that it's not a thing that we can't do it, but there needs to be a sense of how do we in fact make ourselves the primary consumers of our own products. I mean, it's something that we've even done in New York City, and because for a long time there were a lot of the New York State products that you couldn't get in New York City. And I'm like, how do we not get them in New York City? And we're the largest market in the country. But it was actually more, in some places it was just easier, or you got a better price if you sold it overseas or you sold it someplace else. Right, and ignored the local market. We need to, in fact, be in a space in which we're producing food for our own folks, and that's something that New York State can be helpful with because we're an agricultural state. That we can connect people with the Farm Bureau. We can connect people with like Middletown College, which is an agricultural school that's part of the State University of New York, right? And so we can provide that kind of technical assistance. And then we need organizations on every level to be like Team Bickle. And I'm going to use this because I know, again, I'm going to use a Jamaican example because I'm here. But, you know, somebody in the last panel, again, was talking about track. And Jamaican people take track very, very seriously. Like, even beyond Usain Bolt, like, you know, he was a superstar, but, like, this is not no new thing for them. Right? You go to pen relays, ain't nothing but Jamaican people at the pen relays. Like, nobody else running in the Caribbean. And so, and there's an organization in New York called Team Bickle. And like when I tell you these folks like raise money, like they have big events to support the Jamaican national team. And we need that kind of dedication on other levels. And whether it's in Guyana to deal with the issue of black civil rights and economic access, or whether it's building up the health infrastructure, right, in the Caribbean, right? We have resources. And so not just remittances should be coming from New York here, but there really should be a nonprofit NGO infrastructure that's built to support the various sectors of what the Caribbean needs, whether it's food security, housing, healthcare, education, economic development, and even human rights, right? And so, because there's a human rights crisis happening in Haiti right now that we have not been able to crack, and you know, and that's a place that even CARICOM, I feel, should be more active than they really have. And I'm not trying to be critical, but you know, but I've been critical of everybody that we have literally stood around and watched this country for 2.5 years sink into an abyss. And we have not resolved it yet. And so, you know, you could talk about Israel and, you know, Ukraine, and I pray for those people, and, you know, we should do all we can to stop those wars or whatever, but we have a humanitarian crisis happening, you know, a few hundred miles from here that we have not addressed and people are not talking about, and that we have not organized ourselves around. And so we need to make sure that we are operating together, because we are the people who were here the day before yesterday. And we're going to be the people who are going to be here the day after tomorrow. So we all have to, continue to bring good into the world and let no good be lost. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You've heard a lot of very important ideas put on the table. I said this is a conversation. So it's now your turn to put your ideas on the table and ask those questions. However, just one little point I have to make. I have been asked to give preference to the new and young people in the room. Okay? That's what I want to talk about. Okay, good. All right.
So I speak on behalf because I do the 30 under 30 in Washington, D.C. Every year. I've been doing it for the past 6 years. I serve as Chief Justice and Advisor. And I attend conferences like these, and I invite them out. But they say to me, I can't come. I have to find money to pay for them, room and board. So I'm saying, how can we get over that hurdle? I was traveling with Phoenix, is right there, and Imani, I don't know where she turned, there she is, right, and I was traveling with them, and I'm so thrilled to see them, and I engaged them in conversation. But these guys, I don't know if their company sponsored them for them to be here, but training these youths is something. They are not, the social change that our Honorable Prime Minister, P.J. Patterson spoke about, it is a real thing. I am a leadership coach, and I coach them. When I'm talking to them, I can't get past what they're asking for. Their desires are linear. They don't want kids yet. They want to get certain things. They want that house, just like he mentioned. They want all of those things, and I have to be holding them back because guess what? The mental health steps in. Because if they don't get it by the age of 30, then they start getting psychological issues and all of that. I'm not a therapist either, but I'm telling you, I'm coaching them, and these are the things that are coming up. So my question is, what is my question? The fact is that they need to be at these conferences, and how can we get them here so they can be engaged? They're filmmakers, they're physicians, they're lawyers, they're farmers. I have two now in Ghana that is a farmer that I've been working with. They're across the Caribbean and the United States and into Ghana as well. Thank you.
Any answers? Thank you.
In the NAACP, we have what is called the youth and college chapters. People don't want to do it anymore. We've gotten out to habit. But you know, we used to do fish fries and chicken dinners to support our own community. Speaker knows that. In Bronx, that's what you did for the NAACP. That's what they have done in Brooklyn. Sister Annette Robinson know that our churches, you have to resources, as Honorable Abbott said, we have resources in our community. We just have to organize and get it done. There are churches that sponsor young people. There are different, the Divine Nine, you heard about them, the sororities. They support young people. So we just have to reach out, connect, communicate, and say that we need to. I flew down with a young man on the plane telling me that his daughter was coming down. She's a lobbyist for the U.S. Chamber. Where is she? Wonderful. He told me that she was coming first time for her to be here. There are and who said it earlier, after George Floyd, a lot of people lied to us. A lot of corporations lied that all the things they were going to do for us. Find some of them and say, look, we have a program. Write it up and tell them about the conference. That's the way you get it done.
I just want to add, a lot of times in this position that I've had, I get, a macro question asked that sometimes needs a micro answer. And I think that something like this, if, as everyone said, we do have resources. I just think we have to get connected to it because, I'm pretty sure that even in my capacity as well, if I knew that there was a group of people I want to come, I could probably find someone to sponsor them, a corporation to sponsor them, or somehow, I could end up doing it. I could have, I have resources as the speaker to send me, but I have not, other than in, say, in my local community, but I think what we should do is not wait until the Carib News invite comes out, and we plan, I think, a year from now, if we know we want to have young people come to the Carib News Conference, we should be starting to identify them now, and you can turn to people like myself and others who can reach out to a major corporation like Google and say, hey, I really need you to sponsor, 20 people to come to this conference. So that's what I say, it's a macro question, but give me a micro request, and I could probably be able to handle that.
Terrific. Thank you. Anybody else? Question? It doesn't matter.
Good afternoon. I want to thank our distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be here to hear the thoughts and the insight that you're presenting to this world. I'm Ricardo Bentham, and I sponsored my daughter. I paid for her ticket and her airfare. And the reason I did that is because she works for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as a director of engagement and membership. And she says to me one time, she said, when I go to these conferences, the room is filled with 90% white male and female. I can't identify with anybody in the room. So my point was to invite her to a room with us that speak issues, okay? So that's why she's here. She's the youngest in the room, and it's for the transition for it to happen. But my question, as it directs to this conference right here, is for the speaker and for the distinguished honorable parliament member. And I was speaking to one of the CARICOM leaders, Mayor Motley, and she informed me that King Charles, now after they dethroned the Queen and left in 2021 as part of the monarch, that he is now considering reparations and the impact that the British colony had on slavery. Not that you need a study for it, but that was the response in the question. And my question to you is, can you elaborate as a member of his cabinet, how is it real, is it true, or what can we expect? And the second question is to the speaker. There's a senator named James Saunders in Queens, and he recently had a symposium on reparation in Queens, York College, and he spoke about for the community to know that New York State is making a move on reparation. My question to you is, have anything been done or any bills been on the table, and where can we go from here knowing that he's bringing this to the community?
Anyone want to take that question?
There's two questions. One,
Two questions.
Hi, can you hear me? On the question of reparations, it's always been something that I've been concerned with, but it has really shot up the agenda in the UK now. What most people don't know is that when Britain abolished slavery, they gave millions of pounds in, the equivalent would probably be billions now. They gave millions of pounds in compensation to the slave owners. And we didn't get, people of colour didn't get a penny in compensation for the experience of slavery. So slavery is much more, people talk about it a lot more than they used to, even to the extent that you talked about King Charles, but there are families whose money came out of slavery who are now putting their hands up and saying, we realize that was a terrible thing, we want to give back, we want to give back money, we want to give back our time and attention. So I think the concern about slavery, even including King Charles, is very real. The debate now is how you deliver the reparations. Do you just give money to individual communities or countries? Or do you spend the money on educational projects or different types of projects? But yeah, there's a very real interest in reparations in the UK, the biggest interest in reparations that I've ever seen.
So to answer the second part of your question, and as much as the New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate works together, I do have to give a little bit of a shout out to the Assembly that we were the ones that introduced the reparations bill. As much as I love James Sanders, it was born out of this. So let me tell you where it is now. So we actually passed a bill in the Assembly and the Senate. James Sanders is the sponsor. Mikhail Salages is the sponsor in the Assembly that appoints a panel. I don't remember the number of appointees. The Senate gets, right, so the Senate gets appointees, the governor gets appointees, and the Assembly gets appointees. And we will appoint, let's say, organizations, experts in the area of reparations to study and give recommendations to the legislature on how to handle. And ultimately, you come back to the same question. Do people want direct payment? Or do you do something around policy change? Now, just off the top of my head, it's the question: do you give somebody, fish for the day, or you teach them how to fish? And I think ultimately, that's probably just again where I am. I would probably be more supportive of how do we do something across the board through programming that can get us out of this situation, because I don't know if just handing someone the check, is going to make up for that. Now, recently in Puerto Rico, we had, I was there last weekend. I had a meeting with the governor. I believe she is inclined to sign the bill, and she wants to make some chapter amendments. So our staffs, the Assembly staff, the governor's staff, and the Senate staff is working through that. But I do believe by the end of this year we will have establish a reparations committee in the state of New York. But I would just say this, reparations is really something that should be handled by the federal government, because one of the complications that we'll have if we wanted to start getting into direct payments, you really probably would have to, one, prove that you were a descendant of a New York slave, because like my family came from South Carolina, my American side came from South Carolina. So probably would have to show that there was some relationship between a South Carolina slave that became a New York slave. And that might be a thing that's very difficult to do. So that's why we're going to let people who've been handling this for a very long time, that have been studying this for a long time, come back and give recommendations. The legislature and the governor will have the final say on where we go. But I just want to say as individual states are starting to take this up, and California did it, and they came back saying it was like, I don't know, $700 trillion or something like that. And I don't know if that's a realistic place that you're going to end up. No way is California going to write a check for, not even multiples of billions, let alone trillions. But maybe we start to do things that really allow black people finally to prosper from many of the policies that held us back, for hundreds and hundreds of years. So.
Let me just add to that. The NAACP is very much a part of it. We've been at the hearings with Senator Sanders and the Assemblywoman. We're working through it. Reverend Sharpton and myself have met with the groups. I'm going to say it again. You better listen to what Ms. Green put out here this morning. That's where we need to go. We need to straighten out where we are and talk about our future. It's just not us today. It's the future. It's our children, our grandchildren, children yet unborn, that we have to think about. And what Senator Parker put out here today, and what the speaker said, in New York State, where we have the chocolate really flourishing, we can do a lot of things with the resources and the accessibility that we have. I think we need to think about not just today, but tomorrow and the next tomorrows on this issue.
Just a couple more questions.
Well, I'm going to let somebody else take the question.
Good afternoon. My name is Chantel Koch. I'm a nurse practitioner. I represent Hope View Gardens Dementia Interventions. And my question is, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now? So my name is Chantel Koch. I'm a nurse practitioner practicing in the Southeast area. And I am here as a young person. And we talk a lot about this economic wealth, but we don't talk about, as Dr. Dukes talked about, the healthcare disparity in the African American Black community across the globe in terms of strokes, prostate cancer, Jamaica, 304 men, and diabetes and cancer. And a lot of it has to do with our access in healthcare accessibility. I am glad with the Biden and Harris administration for passing lots of money for healthcare disparity, and now it's been attached. But I'm talking to you, the Honorable Abbott, and so forth. How can we in the Black community start talking about our healthcare disparities? You can have tons of money in the bank, but if you are unhealthy, it means nothing to you. And having representation.
Let me jump in on this. So one of the things that we have been doing a lot of is, again, I talked so much about how much I represent a very large Caribbean community. Part of what we need to do is create twinning programs, and maybe we'll call it triplicate programs, being that we're talking about the Golden Triangle, right? But what happens, I know, in New York, for instance, around one of the big areas that so three of the big emphasis in my office is lupus, sickle cell anemia, and HIV and AIDS. One of the things that we find in HIV and AIDS is that we have tried to work with other places around twinning, particularly, let's say, with Trinidad. I know I've done a lot of work with Trinidad and a lot of work with Barbados, in part because I know that they have very high rates, and then what happens is people go back and forth, and right? And so if you're not having the same kind of education, it doesn't mean anything because people are not necessarily getting in the community that you're necessarily working, right? And so as we talk about what the Honorable Minister Abbott talked about is, again, us being increasingly a global people, that looking at those kind of programs are really important. Again, can't speak to, one of the things about the United States that people have to be really clear about, because of federalism, things like education, housing, healthcare are not done nationally. As much as you hear presidents and congressional people talking about it, those programs are really done state by state. So in the state of New York, we actually do a lot of work on health disparities. And the biggest thing and having sat on a number of legislative health disparities task force, the big thing is education. Right? And education for everybody, because a lot of times when you hear health disparities, you think it's just racism and it just belongs to whites, right? But you're just as likely to be underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed or just mistreated by a health professional who's Black, Latino, or Asian as you are from somebody who's white. And so some of the legislation I've put in, for instance, has been around medical school education and working very closely with organizations like Downstate, which is right outside my district. But Downstate is really, people think about Downstate as a hospital, but it's actually a medical school with a hospital attached to it, right? And working with people like Dr. Wayne Riley, we fought very hard to get Dr. Wayne Riley there, who had been at Meharry, which is the largest Black medical school in the country, to Downstate, which we produce the third largest number of health professionals of color in the country, mostly people of African descent, and making sure that they're educated correctly. So we are doing a number of things. I think that there's more that needs to be done around particularly research and funding research around autoimmune diseases like lupus. Sickle cell is almost impossible because people see it as a Black disease. But I think we're really on the cusp of seeing some exciting things happening there. I just said this a couple of days ago to a group that I spoke to, is that one of the things that we're dealing with on the ground is that the intersection between the health disparities around sickle cell and the crisis that we're having around people taking opioids, right? The opioid crisis, right? Because you have, people who are in crisis, and sickle cell crisis will show up at a emergency room and say, I'm in pain, I need help, and they will interpret that as somebody trying to score drugs to deal with their habit, as opposed to somebody who's having a genuine health emergency, right? And so education around that and trying to work out those things have been one of the things that I know I've been trying to address, both again on the education level, but also with the healthcare system. And I think that that's part of what I was talking about when I'm saying that we have to like build these team Bickles, right? Like around like who is the group in New York that is working around health equity, not just in New York, where I think we have plenty of resources for that stuff, but then also working tandemly in the CARICOM nations to make sure that the nations here are getting access to that same kind of both education and resource around that, right? As we're again talking about, and then again we should be doing the same kind of thing in West Africa. West Africa really should have the best health in the entire world because, you know, you can't even see a doctor unless they're Nigerian in New York, let me just say that. And if you want to see a nurse and she ain't from the Caribbean, then you don't have a nurse, right? And so it's a shame that we have these many resources on the ground and then it's not translating both to our communities and to the diaspora.
Thank you. That's my senator. I would like the Speaker of the Assembly to remember me, Bishop Gonzalez, because I'm definitely going to ask for your support to get students to come to the conference. Okay. So
Challenge accepted.
we talked. we focus on two systems of school in America, and there are three. We have public school, charter school, and private schools. Independent schools that are owned by blacks for parents who want their children to have a Caribbean experience because that's where they came from. And then we want to help those children. We send them to all types of schools in America, and we want to connect them to the University of the West Indies in the Caribbean. So I just want to know, can we address that? How we will be able to get them to not just go to historical black colleges in the state, but to come to the Caribbean, whether it's in Trinidad or in Jamaica at the University of the West Indies. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You want to carry it over after lunch? All right. I have a quick question for our panelists. We have additional questions, but it's lunchtime. Stomach's grumbling. Can we? Sorry, I'm going to ask the answer. I just want to let them know so they don't run away from me. Okay. Would you be willing to come back after lunch to continue the conversation?
Can we just take, because I have upstairs in the house, can we just take, I don't want to hold anybody else up, but if somebody has specific questions, afterwards you can always take them on, I'll be here till Sunday, but I don't know if I'll be able to come back.
After lunch. Okay. All right, so let's get that question answered that the bishop put on the table. And then if you don't mind, I have one young lady. Sorry. Town hall meeting tomorrow, so we can continue in the town hall meeting tomorrow. Okay. All right? Okay, so do you want to take that question for me, please, someone, and then we'll move on.
I don't know, I wasn't sure what the question was. What's the question?
The question is, how do we help the black schools in America that are private, where the Caribbean children are coming? They're not public school and they're not charter school. Can we bring them together and then make sure we can help them come to the University of the West Indies?
Well, I'll say this. We, you know, as if they're not a charter school and not a public school, there are restrictions that we have as state legislators. And say that again?
Is it fair that there's
I mean, but when you're a private school, the jurisdiction that we have as state legislators, like there are private schools I have in my district that we are limited in our ability financially, other than I'd say the core issues that we can around feeding them, books, transportation, right, things like that. So it's different than a charter school and it's different than a public school. The state's ability to really, I'd say, be involved with private schools.
Let me say this, Bishop. So, Bishop, let me say this. I don't necessarily have, and I don't think any of us have a running tab of who those schools are. If you convene them, I will bring legislators and others to the table to make sure we figure out resources. There are things that we can do, and let me say this, the speaker's 100% right. We're severely limited because, particularly if they're not nonprofit organizations, because many of the schools, right? So if they're nonprofit, there's probably some things we could do, others we can't. But he's right, outside of the regular, and it won't be parody. Whatever we do will not be parody of what we do to charter schools and traditional public schools. By the way, charter schools are public schools, right? So they're just non-traditional public schools, but they're public schools. So we can do things with them that is different. But having represented a Jewish community and having worked with a lot of the shuls, there are numbers of things that we can do with outside entities that we can bring them together. So if you convene them, let me know, and I'll help bring some folks together and we'll get it done.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
I want to mention one thing that you have to take into account, that when these kids are trained in Jamaica or any Caribbean islands, they're not necessarily, they have to be retrained again in the United States, because I know, and my research proves that, I did a success strategy of Caribbean American leaders living in the United States. That was what my dissertation was on. And the doctors, that all of them that were trained elsewhere, when they come back, it's not recognized. So it has to be a full circle.
This sounds to me like it's a continuing conversation. Very important continuing conversation. We do have a town hall meeting tomorrow, I believe. Tomorrow, and I think we should bring it to the table. A gentleman over there wants to talk about health parity also. So let's bring it to the table. Yeah, so that we don't miss lunch. And I don't want to blame for missing lunch. Thank you so much, our panelists here. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good information. Thank you so much.